Hopefully we'll get as much good feedback tonight as we did on Monday, and the same good questions and things like that. That was a real help.
Yeah, good
Okay,
question.
we're going. Okay, I think we're live.
I see it on I see the live button on my screen.
It didn't go to YouTube yet.
I see live on YouTube also.
Yeah.
Maybe there's just a delay.
Okay.
Are you? Let me know if we need to just wait a few seconds. That's no problem.
There we go.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and to the entire internet who is watching, as always.
Sorry.
Is that okay? Do we just listening at the same time?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Once again, good evening to the whole internet who's watching us tonight. My name is Nathan Lombardo. I'm the Planning and Zoning Administrator for the City of South Fulton. On the presentation tonight with me are Marissa Jackson and Dana Gray, who are planners with the City of South Fulton. And hiding somewhere is Christina Cummings, the Deputy Director of Community Development, also with the City of South Fulton. The topic du jour is the zoning rewrite that the City of South Fulton is currently in the process of finishing up. We are doing these last presentations. This is the second of 4, doing them this week and next week to solicit some public input and to make sure that everyone who has wanted to contribute to the process here has contributed. The next slide, please. We'll talk first about the ways to participate in tonight's call and in the process overall. We will be taking comments in the YouTube chat. There's a chat box below the screen you're watching us on. So please, at any time, at any point, type in a comment. You can also email us at planning@cityofsouthfultonga.gov. We are manning that email address as we speak. Please take the time, and as soon as that comment or question comes to your head, go ahead and send it to us right then. We'll pause periodically to check the email and check the chat box for any questions or comments, and we'll do the best we can to answer them as they come in. If any questions or comments come in that we are unable to answer off the top of our head tonight, if you give us contact information such as an email address or phone number, we can get back to you most likely tomorrow to complete the circle there and make sure you get the comment and feedback that you need to know. The next slide, please. So continuing that topic, the draft zoning ordinance is posted on our city website. If you go to the City of South Fulton homepage and click on community development, there'll be a link for a specific website for the zoning rewrite project. The entire zoning ordinance is posted there. It's a little over 300 pages. We definitely encourage anyone who is interested, and that could be residents, visitors, business owners, developers, please take the time and scan through that ordinance. As you'll see tonight, it's laid out in a way that facilitates pretty easy and thoughtful and logical thumbing through. And we think it's a very user-friendly document and something that you could skim through and find the most interesting and relevant section to you pretty easily. And so, as I said, we look forward to, we encourage you to go to the website and read the entire document. We've also created a new survey. It is posted also on the city's website, the same location. If you have taken the survey before, we encourage you to do it again. It is a new survey. We put a lot of thought into the questions, and they're going to be very useful for us. If you haven't taken it yet, please take it now for the first time. Again, we strongly value your input there. And the link that is on this slide is the link to the specific zoning rewrite page. But as I said, if you go to the City of South Fulton website and go to the community development page, there'll be a link to the zoning rewrite page. It will pop up right on your screen. You'll be able to see it. Next slide, please. Again, we strongly encourage anyone interested in this process to complete the survey and read the ordinance. The email address on your screen now is an email address that goes direct to our consultants who are helping us write this ordinance. If you want to email them directly, you can do so at this address. But again, the email address at the bottom of the screen, and that link is posted on every slide. So don't need to worry about remembering where to comment to. Those comments would go directly to us, and the email address on the screen goes directly to our consultants. All right, very brief overview of the agenda for tonight. We'll obviously be hitting all these in order. Going to talk a little bit about what the overall goals are for this project, talk about the process so far, what we've done in terms of analyzing the current situation, our current zoning, going a little bit over how we have solicited public input up to this point, and going over some of the key points of the draft of the document. Included are some specific recommendations. I want to state we're not going to be going line by line through the new zoning ordinance. I don't know that anybody would want to sit through 300 pages of me talking, but we'll be hitting some of the most commonly asked about points. And as I said, if you have any specific questions concerning areas that interest you, please let us know that, and we will do that. And then we'll finish up with some next steps, where we are going to go from here. Again, we have meetings. The same meeting will be held next Monday and next Wednesday. The survey will be online for another week and a half. I'm sorry, another week. It'll be taken down next Thursday morning. So you have a week to complete the survey, and another week to send us comments and to listen to this presentation again if you so desire. Next slide, please. All right, to start off, and I'm going to do my best to not just read every slide tonight, because I know that we have eyes and we can read it, and I want to make sure that my commentary is value added for everyone watching this. But in overall sense, we want to customize the zoning ordinance to meet specific needs. So if we're going to undertake this process, it's important that we go beyond the zoning that we have now. The city of South Fulton current zoning is remnants of the old Fulton County zoning from decades ago. And as a new city, it's important that any of the last vestiges of unsuccessful or antiquated zoning regulations be left in the past, and make sure that we have a zoning ordinance that is specific to our needs and specific to the desires that we want to have as a city going forward. We also want to update this for compliance with all relevant state and federal laws, and that's something that is done periodically as well. We want to make sure we're always up to compliance, and as I said, those regulations can change regularly, so it's important that we not fall behind. If you have ever had a chance to work with our current zoning ordinance, you would see that it's one large PDF with no table of contents and no internal menus or guidelines to help you find your way. And so one of the big steps we wanted to take was creating a document that was a lot more user-friendly. So you'll see that, and we'll talk about this later in slides as well, you'll see that our zoning ordinance now has gone from over 30 articles to 10 articles. And each section has a table of contents that is detailed. And so anyone needing to use one specific section or looking for one specific thing should be able to find that with a lot more ease than we have been able to in the past. That will greatly benefit not only any individual looking to participate in our regular planning process through planning commission meetings, community zoning meetings, or just staying up to date on the city's functioning, but it'll help developers get to their sought after guidelines more easily. And maybe I'm partial, but I really look forward to it helping the staff, helping us be more organized and to provide better and more expedient customer service. And last thing we want to do with the new zoning rewrite is to coordinate with other documents. It's very important that all of our documents be speaking the same language and that all of our policies and procedures are coherent, and we don't have documents and regulations in one document that are in conflict with documents and regulations in other places. So just making sure that everything is speaking the same language and following the same path and structure is one of the things that we were really looking forward to doing. Go to the next slide, please. So let's talk about the analysis process and what that really means in terms of analyzing the situation at hand. We wanted to examine any regulations that we had, any zoning ordinances that were simply outdated. That can be in terms of language. It could be in terms of being in conflict with a current process, which we'll talk about in a second. It could be outdated construction materials in an architectural guidelines. Those are things that change all the time. So I just wanted to make sure that all those outdated codes were indeed left in the past and that we identified them. Every code, every zoning ordinance has a large section devoted to definitions. So we wanted to make sure that the glossary of planning terms was up to date and comprehensive. there's always new terms coming out. There's always new materials. There's always new thought processes and just new ways of doing things. And so we wanted to make sure that we have all those terms covered. We will never be able to cover every term. We learn new ones every day, but wanting to update the ones that we had. And same with uses. We'll go over uses extensively later on, but I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that we did analyze the uses in terms of what are allowable commercial functions and industrial functions in the city. Actually analyzing the zoning and overlay districts, their boundaries, their effectiveness, trying to figure out if there were any outdated or unused zoning areas, and then evaluating the effectiveness of our overlays and modernizing those in some ways are another thing we wanted to make sure that we were doing. Our processes and procedures is not necessarily one that affects a lot of our users daily, but it's something that the staff work with all the time. And so we wanted to make sure that the processes and procedures accurately captured all the information that we needed to operate efficiently and effectively, that accurately represented the actual processes and procedures that we were doing. A lot of times in organizations, you'll find that what is being practiced is not necessarily what's written down, and that just happens through ease of use and learning the effectiveness of different processes. And so we want to make sure that those were operating efficiently. And then again, finding out that or ensuring that all of the documents and ideas that we wanted to implement in a new zoning were consistent with itself, and that you weren't having to look in multiple sections of a document for the same regulations or conflicting regulations. Go to the next slide, please. So this is a very high-level overview of what we have been doing in terms of analysis, but the point to be made here is that we were thorough, and we went all throughout the document to analyze all the different things that I just talked about in order to make the most effective document. The underlined line there, what I want to stress here is that the intent here was not to reinvent the wheel, and we did not want to create documents that people were resistant to or unfamiliar with. We know that a lot of thought, a lot of effort, and a lot of good intention went into the documents that we currently have and the guidelines that we currently have. And so one of the major goals that we wanted to accomplish was making sure that those documents were easy to use and easy to understand for everyone, and not just coming up with an entirely new set of standards that would be unfamiliar to, again, developers, businesses, residents, anyone interested in the zoning process for the city of South Fulton. Go to the next slide, please. And again, this is a lot of words on one slide, and I caught that last time I presented this too. But the point that is coming across in this slide is that we were thorough internally. It wasn't just one person sitting in a room reading through it. It wasn't just one group. It went to many different parts of the organization and had many different eyes on it. And it was done in order to get new opinions, different opinions, and to be thorough in terms of capturing all the input that we needed to do. Next slide, please. One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later on is the actual zoning map. But one of the major things we needed to do is update that map. And a map will be created at the end of the process, as is logical. But there were zoning areas on the zoning map that were not used. And so there was a discussion as to should we keep those or not keep those? And that's where we're talking about inactive zoning districts. There's no reason to keep around outdated zoning policy and outdated districts that have no current use. And again, analyzing the zoning for compliance with state and federal regulations that are always changing and, always a requirement to be in compliance with in order to receive federal funding and state funding too. Next slide,
I have
please.
a question.
Oh, sure. Well, we can pause right here then. What's the first question?
Great. From Michelle McCulley, has the transmission line regulations and mail kiosk standards been removed?
I don't believe they have been removed. That's something, and I have an email from Michelle McCauley, and I will thank you for your thorough analysis of the zoning. I can research that point specifically for you, but I do not believe mail kiosk has been removed because I know that is something that we don't deal with infrequently. And so we can make a note to check those specifically. Anything else come in?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Just to overview the public input to date, and I'll say it again, this is a second of 4 public meetings we're having right now. Next Monday and next Wednesday, I'll be giving the same presentation. And we will have the survey posted until next Thursday morning. But we received hundreds and hundreds of public comments up to this point. And this process has been ongoing since last year. So we're pushing 18 months on this zoning rewrite process. We've had multiple public meetings. We've met with individual council members as well to get their input. And they want to make sure that their constituents are well represented. Next slide, please. So, and I'm going to make a point to list these individually because I think it's important to stress this. 2 planning commission meetings, 4 workshops, 9 town halls, many, many other community meetings. We've had meetings with individual council members and meetings internally with staff and the consultants. And as I said, this is our last round of public meetings being conducted this week and next week. Next slide, please. This is a really important slide to convey, and I want to tell the residents and stress the importance of public participation and public input to the city of South Fulton. This is something, public input, that is gathered and valued throughout the year and not just at one specific time. And I wanted to show this slide to demonstrate some of the other ways that we are getting public input. So right now, we are in the zoning rewrite process, and this will be done by the end of next month. At the same time, we will be starting an update to our comprehensive plan, and that will go for at least another year. And we'll be getting public input at many times throughout that process, and will be incredibly valuable. Public Works does the same thing too, and I believe that the transportation plan had their first vote at the last council meeting they've been working on, and we had input on that plan as well for transportation. Parks and Rec is working on their own plan for future development. Code enforcement interacts with the public all the time, whether it be through letters or discussions with the officers. And we currently have an economic development plan that is with the council for adoption. So public input is something that we value a lot and make a point to reach out to the public a lot to get input. Next slide, please. I'll just pause really quickly. Has any other questions come in?
None.
Okay. Pardon me, I had to take a sip of water. So let's talk about the current draft of the zoning ordinance that is posted online. I said I won't read through all of these in detail, but a major point is that we've gone from 34 articles to 10. We've reorganized a lot of sections, got rid of duplicate sections, got rid of conflicting areas, and created a table of contents and a guide for the document that is much easier to use for everyone involved in this process. I definitely envision that some of these sections will be printed off as user guides. I know that the sign regulations in Chapter 7 by themselves could be printed off as a quick guide for people who wanted to put up signs, and same with parking. So a lot of these things will be greatly beneficial towards the expedience of and use of this document. We will go through some of those sections in detail tonight. I think some of the use tables will also be printed off sort of as quick guides for business license and new businesses coming into the city, and we'll go through those in a little bit. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the key recommendations that have been developed in the zoning ordinance. And we'll get to the use tables in just a minute, as you can see. So I won't go through this in detail here, but let's go ahead and go to the next slide and talk about the allowed uses here, because I think this is one of the aspects that is most important and most frequently asked about by residents. So previously in our zoning ordinance, uses were distributed throughout each of the zoning guidelines in multiple sections. So in effect, what was happening is you were searching through many different pages and many different parts of the document to find out what uses were allowed. And one of the things that was really important was to present those. I'm going to read this word for word. Present them in a user-friendly table format. That's going to make a much more easy to read and use document. And we're going to go through a lot of those uses because I said we get frequent questions on what's allowed in a certain area, what is not allowed. And I will also say that a banned uses table has been created to show specifically residents how we're making efforts to clean up some of the uses that have been in the city for a long time. One of the things that we'll get to, and I will differentiate a little bit, is a distinction between different commercial uses. It's really important that we kind of understand, and I say we understand, meaning you want to make sure that there's clarity in different commercial districts regarding the placement of uses and the proximity to residential areas. And so some commercial uses, for example, a restaurant, a dry cleaners, bars, things you would walk to or close to your place of residence, are dealt with separately and differently than other commercial uses such as tire repair shops, large shopping centers, things that are still very useful and places that you would frequent, but may not necessarily want down the street from you. So we wanted to make sure there were very clear and much more clear guidelines than have been available in the past, available in the future. Next slide, please. Right, so a lot of this is directly related to the placement of industrial zones and commercial zones related in their relationship to residential areas. So we want to make sure that certain uses are limited in terms of their proximity to residential areas and have the limit of uses next to one another be limited as well. One of the questions that we get a lot are about dollar stores and gas stations and about package stores, things like that. And there were clear directives to do what we can to limit those stores in terms of their frequency in the community and how close they are to other ones. You don't want to have the same stores repeated over and over again in the same districts. I know that it's a strong desire of residents to have a variety of uses in their community because we want them to be sustainable long-term areas. And so you can't really have that if the same uses are propagating all over the place. And what we'll talk about briefly later on too is the enhancements to development standards. We want to make sure that our residential neighborhoods are built with quality in terms of quality of design, quality of construction materials, quality and the variety of houses, because we want to be able to attract a variety of different residents. And so it's important that a lot of thought go into our residential areas as well. And I'll pause here really quickly. Have any new questions or comments come in?
Yes,
Okay.
Michelle McCulley, she said she was like for the staff to work together with the city engineer to address the buffers and landscaping section of the zoning ordinance.
Noted. And I don't disagree with that. And I hope that some of the changes that we've made have been reflective of our desire to do so. But we will certainly make a point to address that. And as I said, Ms. McCauley, I know that you have sent in some comments, which I thank you for. If you have any additional ones, please do not hesitate because your comments and those of anyone else watching me now or watching me over the next week, they'll be compiled and sent directly to our consultants to be discussed and adapted for use into our new zoning ordinance. So we really, really value the comments that come in and specific questions and specific concerns are certainly very, very helpful. Go to the next slide, please. All right, this is a little bit of what I talked about before in terms of the differentiation in commercial zones. It's really important that those uses allowed in the less intensive commercial zones be reflective of the uses that are most desirable and desired by and near residential neighborhoods. And the example posted on this slide is, I think, particularly useful. You know, a neighborhood restaurant with outdoor seating is going to be dealt with and encouraged in a different area than an automobile repair shop. They're both very valuable and very useful and have a place, but you may not necessarily want them to be in the same neighborhood or in the same proximity to where you live. And at the same time, we also want to make sure that our zoning and our use guidelines are compatible with the recommendations proposed in our city economic development plan. That's one of those documents that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, has recently been completed and is awaiting adoption by city council. And so reinforcing the point of having documents talk to one another and having documents be in compliance with one another, this is a good example of where we wanted to do so. Go to the next slide, please. I do want to talk a little bit about industrial uses, and we'll get into this more when we go over the use tables and the banned uses list. We know that industrial development and industrial uses are important in the city of South Fulton, but that's not to say that we want them all over the place or that we want our city to be overwhelmed with those. And so it's very important that we understand how industrial uses are coming in, what industrial uses are coming in, where they should go, what uses are allowed, and what buildings should look like. And although this is a very egregious example on this slide, be it a flexible warehousing space and an incinerator, which I believe is a banned use now, the point is that we've put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into making sure that the uses that we know we want and know we need are allowed in the right places, and the uses that we definitely do not want and do not want to see spread are not allowed in the same places. Go to the next slide now. All right, and after this slide, I believe we can pull up those use tables, but I do want to go over the use tables quickly with everyone watching tonight. I won't talk about every single use because, as I said, there are 23 pages, so I don't want to spend an hour going over those. However, any really pertinent or commonly asked uses we'll make a point to talk about. And if anyone has any questions about uses as we go through them, please do not hesitate to let us know, and we can pause and go over any of those questions that need to be asked. But you'll see these are very, very useful and very user-friendly. And so they are a great, great addition to our zoning ordinance. And I believe we can pause here. I'd like to pause first and see if there's any other questions that have come in.
No, not at this time, no.
Okay. Marissa, if you could, we could pull up the use table first. And we are still here for the whole internet. Don't think we've gone away. Just going to pull up a PDF for you to view. Perfect. So let's go over the layout of this table really quickly so that everyone who's watching knows briefly what we're looking at. So you'll see the zoning areas, the zoning sections, if you will, listed at the top of the chart. The quick reference guide that you need to know is that if there's an A in the cell, it's an allowed use. If there's an S, it's allowed as a special permit, which means that we need to go to council for approval. And if it's blank, it is not allowed. So sometimes there's confusion in zoning codes if, and I've seen these done this way, but if a list is, or if a use is not specifically banned, it's allowed. Well, that's not the case here. And I think that's a very important point to express and for everyone to understand. So we've really put a lot of thought into what is allowed where in the city. So we're starting here with residential uses, and you can see, we'll just start scrolling through this slide here, but you can see that we have a various amount and types of housing options allowed in different zoning areas. And we tried to cover every aspect of the modern housing market here, and I believe that we have done so. So Marissa, we can just start scrolling through this slowly, and if anything jumps out, what we can pause. We can just keep moving. You'll see that we have some non-intensive residential care and nursing uses listed here. We get questions about these a lot, whether it be group homes or assisted facilities, and they are allowed only in certain areas of the city. You will see on the right-hand side of the chart here some numbers there. Article 3 of the chart is all about restrictions on uses. So this is in the end of chapter 2. And if you are wanting to look at this chart for yourself at home or print out a copy, if you go to Article 2 in the zoning article that's online, I know it's very long, but if you go to the end of Article 2, you'll get this chart. So you will see all these uses and it's an easy reference guide for you. Then Article 3 is a list of restrictions on uses. So even though schools are allowed in residential areas, there may be some guidelines that they have to follow to be put there. We can see some light recreational uses and some light commercial uses in temporary lodging, such as a bed and breakfast. And I grew up near a bed and breakfast and it was lovely to have around. So that's a nice thing to see there. Let's pause right here real quick. I want to make a point about cell towers, and I made this point last time I did this, and I'm sure I'll make it the next 2 times as well. Cell towers are allowed by special permit in residential areas. I will make a point to say that cell towers these days are typically not the same that you have seen in the past. A lot of times cell towers and cell antennas are put on existing structures or on existing utility poles. So you don't typically see giant radio towers like you may have 10, 15 years, 20 years ago. And a lot of times, I know everyone has seen, if they do have to build new towers, they're usually built among trees and then disguised to look like a tree, which standing on their own can look kind of funny, but when built in a grove of trees, blends in perfectly. So a lot of thought goes into these now, and I just want to make sure that even though it is allowed by a special permit, please don't think that there's going to be large cell towers and radio towers popping up in your neighborhoods, because that is absolutely not the case. So we can keep scrolling now. These are still accessory uses to residential uses. The big one I want to point out here are guest houses, and those are not to be used as apartments, but essentially detached mother-in-law suites are allowed by right in the city of South Fulton, which is a really great policy to have. It also covers things like swimming pools and things like that. Has any other questions or comments come in, Dana?
Let's see. Michelle McCulley says these allowed use tables are very helpful and a great update to the zoning ordinance.
I strongly appreciate that, and I agree. All right, let's pause here really quickly. This is the beginning of the table of non-residential uses. So this is going to be all your commercial uses allowed in the city. You'll see at the top of this table, we have different zoning districts, again, listed across the top. AG, C1, C2, OI is office industrial. Mixed use, I will stress that the city's mixed use ordinance requires residential uses to be mixed in. So you will not see standalone retail shops in mixed use zoning areas. Then we have M1 industrial and M2 industrial. And I still don't know why it's not I1 and I2, but it's okay. So we can start scrolling through some of these. Again, if any questions come in about any specific commercial uses, please let us know. We're anxious to talk about those and calm any concerns that people might have. And Dana, if any comments or anything come in, just feel free to just read those out loud as we're going through these.
I had somebody just came in, a trans-dimensional relocation. Where are Airbnb located in the tables?
That is a good question. And what I would ask that you do is send us your email address, because there's been a lot of internal discussion about Airbnbs. And I want to make sure that I answer that 100% correctly. So please get us your email address and we'll write that down. And I will get back to you on the status of Airbnbs and the regulations that we have in the city. But we are frequently asked about that. And it's something that we've been working on for a while in the city in terms of those kind of regulations.
And Michelle asks, manufacturing is, oh, why is it M1?
Oh, for manufacturing?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Well, she was asking why it is M1.
That is what it was called in Fulton County, and that's what it was called when we switched over.
Yeah, and I think we
So-
took out the M1A to make it all M1 and just have
Yes.
M1 and M2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were some breakdowns or within M1 that were removed because they were not used on the current zoning map, and so there was no reason to keep around uses or options for zoning rather that were not being used actively in the map. So as you can see through our use charts here, let's pause here really quickly because I'm just give an example. You can see that each of the uses are broken down into different groups. On the left-hand side, you'll see NAICS codes. Those are codes given by, I believe, the Department of Labor and or the Census Bureau to help identify economic uses in this country. And these codes are used everywhere. And a lot of economic data is gathered based on those codes. And so we've used the same charts to classify our uses. That's correct. So thank you, Marissa. We do have an Airbnb ordinance that was adopted. I need to check to make sure if that is part of the zoning or part of the other ordinances of the city. So we will check on that, but it says they are allowed in residential areas of the city, and I really thank you for adding that on. I need to make sure that that is either part of the zoning or part of the other ordinances of the city. But as I said, it's something that we have we're asked about a lot and we have dealt with extensively. And again, whoever asked that question, if you would please send us your email address, we can get you a copy of that ordinance specifically. So we can keep scrolling. But what I wanted to express is how each of these uses that are listed here are grouped near like uses. So it's not sorting through lists alphabetically or searching for a certain term. You can search for a specific use based on a more general use. We really have tried to be comprehensive and thorough in developing this chart. And again, for those listening, if you have questions again about any specific use, please don't hesitate to ask or email us directly, and we can get back to you with a specific answer now, or get back with an answer pending a little bit of research. Dan, has any other questions or comments come in?
Michelle just said that she was saying that is what is called M1, it comes from manufacturing. I guess she's referring to your I instead of M.
Oh yeah, that certainly makes sense. Certainly makes sense. I don't know how much manufacturing is necessarily left, but we do have a lot more, obviously, warehousing uses in the city, really due to its proximity near all the major highways and interstates. Most of these uses you see here are pretty normal commercial uses. All the real egregious ones and ones that are more environmentally impactful have been moved to the list of disallowed uses, which you'll see when we get to it. But as I said, a lot of thought and a lot of comments have come in about why is this allowed here, or we don't want any more of these coming in. We want to make sure we encourage other types of uses. So that's the logic behind the placement of these in certain areas. And please let us know, if you look through this table and you find something, if you're curious as to why it's allowed in a certain place, or you see something missing, please let us know that, because there's always more to be taken into consideration and always more opinions to be heard. And more eyes on this chart is certainly not going to be a bad thing. You'll see here all of our warehousing uses are definitely expressly only allowed in those industrial areas. You'll see here, let's pause here real quick. I just want to make mention that when you go through this document online, you'll see areas that have been highlighted and crossed out. That's where a change has been made, and these specific uses have been moved to the disallowed use chart. And I just know that because I just know that. But as you go through the document and you see color coding, you'll see blue. You can keep scrolling, Marissa, but you'll see blue text, and that's new text that's been inserted. You'll see highlighting for changes. You'll see highlighting that's with a red line through it for things that have been crossed out or removed. So all of those have been added just to make it more easy to understand what's in front of you. And that's the last page. I know we're getting to the. Let's pause here real quick. These are all the accessory and temporary use tables. Right, so these would all be allowed as part of a different commercial development. So you can just keep scrolling here. And all of these things and the temporary uses, the bottom of this is what I was looking for, would be allowed via a permit. So you'd apply online through the SAGES system to get a permit. And there's specific guidelines listed in the sections on the right-hand side. You can see in Article 3 for the uses or for the occurrence of these temporary uses, but they would not be allowed by right automatically. You'd have to get a permit for all of those, and those are available all online at this point. And I believe we're very close to the end of this table. Yeah. So now that we're finished with the allowed uses, I see you have the other tab pulled up with the disallowed use table. We can go ahead and flip right through that. If you do me a favor, Marissa, just zoom out just a little bit. Perfect, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Again, we'll scroll through these pretty quickly, but a point that I want to make here is that the previous name was environmentally adverse use distance requirements. What we've done is just gotten rid of the distance requirements and specifically banned them. So all of these are going to be uses that may not be ones that are commonly seen. I'm not sure we have ammunition production in this city, but these uses that are specifically, environmentally impactful, we've moved to be banned. We know that our residents and our community at large places a very strong value on the natural environment and on the green spaces and greenery and the water that we have in this community. And so we did put a lot of thought into making sure that the environment is very strongly taken into consideration in terms of where uses are allowed and what uses are allowed. So you can keep scrolling through this list. And again, if there's any questions about specific uses that are here or specific questions about uses that you don't see immediately, please just let us know that.
I have some.
Oh, sure.
Michelle asks, are incinerators allowed?
I do not believe they are, and I think that we will get to that. I think that question was asked last time too, and I think that was on this chart. But you can just keep scrolling, Marissa, and I believe that we'll get there. There you go.
Just to acknowledge Lawrence Smith, he had a question about the Airbnbs in the use table. That was answered.
Okay, great.
And we have, okay, this is a long one. I'm gonna break this up.
It's all right.
All right, resident property District 4. Okay, we have Patrick Ewing, resident property.
Hold on, the real Patrick Ewing? I'm teasing, sir.
In District 4. His wife and him live on and operate a 40-acre farm here in the city of South Fulton.
Very nice.
The questions focused on rules pertaining to AG1 district, agriculture, livestock, and acceptable uses within those categories. Several of the questions are compiled during conversations with 20 or so neighbors, farm families in the city of South Fulton. If any of the neighbors are listening, perhaps they can chime in if he missed something and also keep him honest. Now, none of the uses listed for parcels zoned AG1 seem to allow property owners like himself producing and baling hay on farm to sell any of their surplus harvest without securing a special use permit from the city. It seems counterintuitive that he can operate a farm winery that sells alcohol or a dog kennel with nuisance barking without special approval, but cannot operate a temporary farmers market offering his hay for sale without running it by us. What changes would need to be made to the proposal in order to accommodate the use case he just describes without special approval? That's question number one.
Okay, let me try and answer that. We'll do these one at a time. I'm so the direct answer to that is I don't really know. The devil may be in the details in a question like that, but I see the logic that we would have in needing a special permit for a temporary farmers market as maybe set up, by a group of people on the weekends, things like that. If you have a normal home business, that would be done a little bit differently in terms of your business license, and you may not need a permit for doing your normal sales. I want to talk with you individually, sir, to kind of understand the full scope of the operations, but I don't believe that the intent of having small farmers markets set up would be to specifically target or focus on one individual farmer. I think the intent there would be, a normal community farmers market where you would have multiple vendors coming in one place and have large crowds coming that you see kind of. I live in Midtown Atlanta or in town Atlanta, and so I know at Piedmont Park they have a farmers market on the weekends sometimes. I actually live near East Atlanta. They have farmers markets in East Atlanta periodically throughout the year. So I think the intent of that use permit would be for that. If you have an issue with selling bales of hay that are surplus or operating your business at your home, reach out to us specifically with that, and we'll see what we can do to accommodate that. Because I wouldn't believe the intention would be to focus on the use that you have in that regard. So Dana, what's the second part of the question?
All right. Second part, section 302.36 covers the subject of horse riding stables.
Mm-hmm.
This section seems to provide some guidelines on riding stable setback requirements for and minimum lot sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Will you please provide some clarification or elaborate on the definition of a riding stable as it's seen under the proposed zoning ordinance, and how would this impact property owners with existing structures that do not meet these new minimum setback requirements? Would this impact someone with an existing structure that would be non-compliant under the new rule from restoring a barn severely damaged by a catastrophe like a tree falling on it, or preclude them from making future improvements to the structure?
The answer to that is no. Existing non-conforming structures are grandfathered in. I will say, if the barn, in this case, and this would be applicable to any situation around the city, and we actually dealt with this today about a sign, but if a structure is non-conforming and completely is destroyed, you would have to build one back that is conforming. But if you were repairing an existing structure, adding on to any addition would have to be in the conforming areas, but you wouldn't have to tear down a usable, suitable non-conforming structure that's already in existence. And I believe I answered that. Oh, you want to know a definition that was in the code? Was that also a question, Dana?
Yes, elaborate on the definition of a riding stable.
I'm going to make a note of that because I've got to search the definitions of the definition of riding stable. I have to go to search the index to read what that says, or read through the glossary. And I can't do that this second, but I will make a note there to do that as I'm talking here. and report back on that to you. And again, if you would reach out to us directly with questions about specific business, we could handle that for you as well. And were there any other parts of that question, Dana?
There's two more.
Okay, let's go.
303.12 covers a similar subject as 302.36, focused on private horse stables.
Mhm.
In 303.12, section B, item number 2 requires all horse shelter structures to be located in the rear of the yard.
Yes.
What do we mean by rear of the yard? And does this guideline seem poorly written, given that most horse farms typically have pastures instead of what most would consider a yard in a residential subdivision? In my case, I see potential for being adversely impacted by this rule, given the location of my home, approximately 2,400 feet from the road and 600 feet from my rear property line. This places my home in the very back quadrant of my 40-acre property, and under this rule, I would be precluded from using approximately 35 acres of my property for anything other than pasture. For example, the USDA NCRS has partnered with me on a number of efforts that improve water quality and ameliorate erosion. One of their recommendations was to build a horse run approximately in a pasture in front of my home. Their thought was this will cut down on horse traffic up to the barn behind my home when foul weather compels them to relocate to cover or the need to get water. Under this rule, I would be non-compliant. Was such a scenario considered, and do minimum setback requires not address the eyesore concern without pigeonholing all improvements to an agricultural property to the back quadrant of a large property?
So number one, I want to state that I am incredibly appreciative of a question this thorough and this detailed, because it gives us a lot of concrete points to address in our analysis of our zoning codes. And so I want to thank you very much for asking a question like that. So the two things I can answer about that right now are, number one, your assumption about a rear yard would be correct. Generally, that is all the yard behind your house. So in your case, where your house is in the back of the lot, you would have a much smaller rear yard. Now, to the second point of that question, that does give us pause to reconsider the way that that section of the ordinance is written. And so what I can tell you is that will be addressed with the consultants who are the gatekeepers of this document. They're doing the typing and writing for us. And so because you asked such a good and specific question, I will be able to make sure that that point is discussed with the consultants and adequately addressed. And so I thank you for that very much. And Danny said there was one more part of it.
Yes, section 303.13 covers outside storage and displays. Again, the rear yard only guideline comes up again and seems to be one size fits all rule. I would like to store my hay closer to my hay field in a very attractive hay barn hidden from the road. However, it seems under this rule, I would be precluded from doing so because my home is located in the back portion of my 40-acre property. Can minimum setbacks be applied as a substitute for the vapid language making up this rule to address the eyesore concern of without adversely impacting owners of farms and large tracts of land over 10 acres?
I understand that. So what I want to say to this is very similar to what I just said, is that I appreciate the detail with these questions are asked, and that we will absolutely be taking these to our consultant to kind of analyze what we can do to create a better ordinance. Some of the challenge with this specific one is the definition of eyesore, and I have found it difficult many points throughout my planning career. You can't really regulate taste, and you can't regulate opinion. And I say that only to make the point that what is an eyesore to one person may not be to somebody else. And I don't say that lightly, but it's kind of a clear point, I think. And so we do have regulations written that are one size fits all. to your point, it is certainly obvious that one size doesn't always fit all. And so in situations like that, we do have a variance process that anyone can go through when they have an objection or a hardship to something that they want to do on their property, to get a variance to do something differently. But we will make a point to address the points that you brought up with our consultants, and there certainly could be ways of making the agricultural guidelines more applicable to situations that may be in practice in the real world. And so I thank you very much for those comments. Anything else come in, Dana?
That is it.
Okay. And I'm just so you know, I'm still searching for the definition of riding stable using a text search in the zoning code. So I have not forgotten about that. But Marissa, we can keep scrolling and get to the end of this at this table. And again, I just want to stress that these are all the uses that are banned in the city. This is the disallowed use table. Those are really great questions. The paper manufacturing. When I lived in Savannah, we used to call it the Savannah stink. There was a paper mill down there, and when they got going in the morning, you could smell it everywhere. I live nowhere near downtown, and you could still smell it. So I'm glad that's on the list for sure.
They are awful.
You know what I'm talking about.
Oh my God. There's one in Waynesville, North Carolina, where my grandparents lived. It is horrible.
Yeah, we definitely were very aware when they were going crazy making production. Okay, I think that is the end of the use tables. Again, those are available at the end of Article 2 and the end of Article 3 in the zoning code. So back to the presentation here. Okay, perfect. So now we are going to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations for zoning districts. I put a picture of the current zoning map in this presentation, not to go through it in detail because the city of South Fulton is huge and has a lot of zoning areas. I wanted to make the point here that one of the goals was to, as it says here, consolidate and streamline active zoning districts and get rid of those districts that were not being used. There's really no reason to have duplicate or multiple, excuse me, I'm tongue-tied, multiple districts that are conveying the same information. I want to also make a comment about the usability of the map here. You'll see there's a lot of colors, and a lot of times you have maps that are not as visually as accessible as they should be. For example, on the map here, you see residential uses in the bottom all being different colors. You have some greens, some browns, some yellows, all residential. So one of the tasks we hope to be undertaking is creating a map that might have some gradients of similar colors so that similar uses are all shown in one shade. Typically on zoning maps, you want to have them be as close to future land use maps as possible. And so you would want to see, for example, if residential uses were all blue, you could have less intense residential uses be light blue, and more intensive and more dense residential uses be dark blue. And so on one area, one map, you could see all the residential uses and all their density, and the same with commercial. And then hopefully you would see, all the different industrial uses in one area, not necessarily bordering residential uses, and so on and so forth. So hopefully we'll be undertaking some cleanup of this map as well and create a document that is very, very quick and easy for the community to view and to use as a tool. Next slide, please. Now, I want to make this point here because I know when the overlay districts were developed, a lot of thought, a lot of effort, and a lot of emotions went into them. And so the point that I want to make here is that the overlay districts are, for the vast majority of all the text in them, left the same. Again, some modernization occurred, and we'll talk about some of those specific examples later on, but the content of the overlay districts is generally exactly the same. We wanted to maintain their development standards because those development standards are unique to and specific to different areas of the city, different neighborhoods. wanted to reorganize, make them a little bit more user-friendly like we have the rest of the code, and provide more and better information for developers so that the regulations are clear and easy to use. And the example given here is providing color palettes instead of just numbers. And so in the zoning code, if you flip to the new one, you will see there's actually pages with many examples of the different Pantone colors that are options to be used, as opposed to just a list of numbers. And the next slide, please. This is a real tangible example of modernizing a code here. Updating lighting standards to incorporate LED instead of incandescent bulbs. That is something that is generally done already in the real world, but our code did not mention that. And so finding that the opportunity to make changes like that, we took it because it makes for a much more relevant and usable document. One point I want to make here too, there are overlay districts covering the majority of the city. There are some areas of the city that do not have overlay districts. There are overlay district guidelines, and there are guidelines that cover all of the city. And so what we want to do is make sure that not only are the guidelines that cover all the city dealt with, but the guidelines that cover the overlay districts specifically are dealt with. We also wanted to create an opportunity, possibly in the future comprehensive plan update, to address those areas of the city that are not covered by an overlay that may need an overlay. A specific example would be a town center that we want to develop. There may not be an existing standard that is appropriate for that area. And there may be changes to the boundaries of the current overlays that need to be moved around. So just something that was analyzed at this time, and know that we are working all the time to make sure that our zoning code is updated and the best it can be for our residents. Next slide. Let's pause right there. Has any new comments come in?
No.
Okay, see. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I was reading our a comment that had come into to me, but that's not a comment for this
I think
presentation.
Marissa has an answer in the chat for the writing stable definition.
Yes. So I see that we don't have a writing stable definition is not in the code right now, but what I can tell you is that we will make sure it gets put in the appropriate place. Now, I will say this. And I want to backtrack that. I'm not sure that it will get put in terms of, because we do not have definitions in the code for every single use. There are terms for commonly used planning terms and development terms in the code. So we do have a definition for every single use in the code. What I will say is that the definition of writing stable would be established in the NAICS references guide. And then we have the dictionary definition as well. What I will also say in regards to definition of specific uses is that there would be a certain amount of liberty given to the reasonableness of a proposal. And so there's always opportunities, and opportunities may be the wrong word, but situations often present themselves in business license approvals or development proposals that are not clear cut and that are not black and white. And so, a reasonable discussion is always had, a reasonable interpretation of the uses is always made when it comes to the specificity of certain situations. So, you're right. The definition of a writing stable may not be in the code, but if a person came to the city and wanted to put a writing stable up, and it was actually a writing stable and not, I'm making an egregious example up, but it was not a car repair shop disguised as a writing stable, that could typically be accommodated by our existing guidelines. So just because a specific definition is not located in the zoning ordinance, and as I mentioned, every single use is not laid out by definition in the zoning ordinance, but just because it's not doesn't mean that the city is onerous in its requirements or allowability of uses. I will mention that riding stables by themselves have a section of Article 3 that has restrictions. So very likely there is a little bit more discussion in the code on the definitions and the requirements for riding stables, as the question asks. So again, if there are specific issues, please reach out to us, and sir, make sure you give us your email address and or phone number, and we can reach out to you directly to see what other questions you might have and how we can make sure your concerns are addressed. It is certainly not the intention of city staff to come up with a set of definitions or guidelines that cause anyone in the community any distress at all. So we want to make sure that that is dealt with in a way that is pleasing to everyone. Have anything else come in?
No.
Okay, and we'll keep talking. So some of those, as I mentioned, some standards for development are not just in overlay districts. Some of them are citywide, and we'll go through some of these quickly, but they involve lighting, exterior cladding, and those have to do with building materials. A lot of that has been specifically talked about as vinyl siding in residential areas. A lot of homes used to use vinyl siding. Most homes do not use that anymore, and so that's been addressed. The reflectiveness of windows, buffers, setbacks, and signs. We get comments and questions about those pretty much every day, and so it was important to us that a lot of thought go into those. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so for lighting, some of the things that were addressed, as we said, going from incandescent to LED bulbs. Want to make sure that I talk specifically about light pollution. So we've definitely addressed the issues of sufficient lighting in commercial areas versus having lights that are overly bright into residential areas. And if there are any concerns about that, please let us know, and we can reach out specifically to you about. I know we get a lot of comments about light pollution from commercial areas and industrial areas into residential areas. And so if there are any other comments or concerns about that, please let us know that as well. But it is something that has been addressed with and thought about. Can we move on? The point I want to make about exterior materials is that the quality of individual buildings and neighborhoods overall impact the stability of neighborhoods and impact the property values of neighborhoods. And so in a general sense, we want to encourage higher quality construction methods and higher quality materials in new construction and renovations so that properties will be better maintained, will be more durable, and will be more valuable to their owners, thus creating more value in an entire community. We want to make sure that we have requirements for materials that are easy to install and easy to maintain, and also don't require a lot of maintenance, because I know we've all seen, I have houses, I live in a house that does not have vinyl siding, but houses right outside where I live have vinyl siding. We've all seen how easy vinyl siding falls off houses. We've all seen how easy vinyl siding gets mildew on it. And so issues like that are ones that we wanted to make a point to address in our development standards. Next slide, please. We get questions about buffers pretty much every day in the planning department. And the point that I want to make with buffers is that we recognize they're important. We want to make sure that buffers in residential developments that neighbor, new residential developments that neighbor adjacent communities are sufficient so that if those communities have allowed industrial uses on the boundary line, that the new residents and the new homes will not be negatively impacted by those industrial uses. We also want to make sure that the buffering requirements between residential areas and commercial and industrial areas are sufficient to allow for a high quality of life for the residents of those neighborhoods. The next slide, please. Same with setbacks. We get questions about setbacks all the time. The biggest issue that we wanted to be concerned with is the variety of site design and building design. And I believe we'll talk about this in a slide or two as well. And on Monday night, we had a challenging time thinking of the right movies to come up with. But if you've ever seen The Truman Show or Edward Scissorhands, where those neighborhoods are all the exact same, that's what we want to avoid in the city of South Fulton. We want to have our neighborhoods be visually interesting and be architecturally significant. And so wanting to avoid repetition and a lack of thoughtful architectural design in our residential neighborhoods and in new development. Next slide, please. So we have reached the end of our presentation for the evening. Number one, I want to thank everyone for listening to me talk tonight. I know sometimes I have a hard time listening to myself, but you've all have stuck with us and listened to me for an hour here. And I really, really appreciate that. And everyone at the city, whether it's other staff, my department leaders, or elected officials, very much appreciate the public participating in this process and helping us along. We're going to have 2 more of these presentations. So if you want to see this presentation again, I'm going to give it 2 more times, next Monday and next Wednesday. And the survey will be up, as we said, until next Thursday morning. So please, please go take the survey. It will just take 5 or 10 minutes of your time. And the information that we gather that is extremely valuable. Once a final draft is given to the council, they'll review and give final input. We should have a draft available and up on our website by October 5th, maybe the morning of the 6th. Adoption of the new ordinance should happen by the end of October. So we are very close to the finish line. We have 1 more hill to get over, and we're climbing that hill as we speak. But the process is close to finish. It's been a very fun and exciting process. And again, I thank everyone for their participation. Are there any last questions or comments that have come in?
Yes, I have 2. Jeffrey Hall, how is the future concerns about apartment building being addressed?
I'm not, if you would please comment again, sir, what the specific concerns you have about apartment buildings are, I'd be able to give a little bit more better answer to that question, but I'm not specifically sure what concerns you are referring to. And if we sign off before you're able to get a question back in, please email that into us and we will make sure to get back to you with an answer on that. What was the other question, Dana?
Mr. Hewing, thank you for being so kind, fielding my questions. My last question covers banned uses.
Yes.
From time to time, I need to make a minor repair on one of my tractors or repair a farm implement like a plow or hay spear. In many cases, farm equipment can have a very long, useful life, or we can only hope. One downside to operating older equipment is that some repair parts are no longer made or supported by the OEM or available on the aftermarket.
Oh, I know that.
Under those circumstances, typically a safe, reliable repair can be performed on equipment using a welder or scrap metal. The prohibited use section seems to not allow for any type of metal fabrication. Can work done in a personal garage or farm shop, small scale, metal fabrication be given special I knew I was going to mess up this one.
It's all right. I already know the answer to the question. The answer is you are absolutely allowed to repair your farm equipment, your automobiles, in your barns and garages and other things of that nature. That the metal fabrication would be basically large scale production of metal goods, not repairs you need to make to your tractors and automobiles and things of that nature. So you are certainly allowed to do repairs on your own equipment on your property for sure.
And Lawrence Smith asks, don't forget to send him the Airbnb documentation regarding where they are located in the use tables.
As long as we have your email address, I will make sure that gets out to you. Do you have it, Dana?
Yes.
Perfect. We will make sure that a copy of that ordinance gets out to you tonight or tomorrow morning. Are there any other questions?
Oh wait, Jeffrey Knoll said, in the past, apartments have long-term detrimental effects on the stability of the neighborhoods.
So I'm not really sure, and I hate to be ambiguous in my answer, so I apologize for that. I'm not really sure what the, where apartment buildings were located, how they were managed was probably a big problem in that area, in that regard, or what the negative effects might have been. What I can tell you is that apartment buildings by themselves, is a perfectly fine aspect of housing, and we do certainly allow that in this city. Those apartments that are managed poorly or not well kept up, one way to deal with that would be through code enforcement. And then obviously the residents of those buildings need to be in contact with their management companies, and so on and so forth. But I definitely recognize that it is possible for apartments to fall into disrepair. What I can tell you is that I know the city is committed to ensuring that that does not happen going into the future. And so if instances do arise where the city needs to be notified to try and step into a situation, please let us know that. And I would encourage any residents of any apartments who have problems with their management companies in terms of the quality of their facilities to please be in contact with our code enforcement as well. And I hate to keep throwing code enforcement under the bus, so I hope Brian doesn't hear this and yell at me as I say that in jest. But please let us know if there are issues with quality of life or maintenance of your apartment buildings, interior or exterior, and we could help out in those regards. But I do know that it is the city's desire to maintain a high quality of life for all of our residents and a high quality of development and maintenance for new and existing buildings. Any other questions?
That is it.
All right, well, I thank everyone for listening. We have exceeded our time frame. Again, any questions or comments, please email them into the planning at cityofsouthfultonga.gov. And I'll be giving the same presentation on Monday and Wednesday of next week. Thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your week and great weekend.
Thank you.
Mhm.